Amir, do you think LA is on fire?
I mean, depends on how you define fire, but no. I'm like, because it is on fire.
It is, but it ain't. But I know. Hey, you said go into it.
Yeah,
I went into it.
Right. So apparently, according to national media, the city of Los Angeles is on fire. But how you feeling, D? What's been going on?
I think it's interesting that that's sort of the description. Is LA on fire? Not in the way people think it is. You know, if you were to walk down most cities, most neighborhoods, there are no riots. There's no looting. There's no anarchy in the streets the way the national media portrays it. But neighborhoods are definitely on edge. Mm-hmm. The people of LA are definitely on edge. And if there's a fire, it's not that LA is burning. It's more like there's this passion that's building because people are legitimately afraid for their immigrant neighbors. People are legitimately afraid that, you know, if you're an immigrant, regardless of your status, even if you have a green card, even if you have residency, that just because of how you look, you can get picked up by these federal agents that have shown up in LA,
right.
A week and a half ago. And so LA is not on fire because we're rioting, but LA is definitely on edge. Definitely on edge. How have you felt in all of this?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. It's being called the Summer of Resistance.
Mm-hmm.
So getting flashbacks of 2020.
Yeah.
But in some ways, the things seem a bit worse, and people are even more ignited now than then. So, but overall, the 500 square miles of LA are pretty calm and chill.
Yeah.
And interesting things have been happening as a consequence of this. It's almost like a spiral, right? Because the protests started in response to the ICE raids, and then the response to the protests are leading to more protests and different things. So, so it's an interesting thing with downtown, or a large portion of downtown being declared an unlawful assembly. And I know you live not too far from there.
Yeah.
And you've pretty much been there every day since.
I've been there almost every day, and we are about a week and a half in right now. Everything started on June 6th. June 6th, all of a sudden, you know, I work with a lot of rapid response groups, and we were starting to get news that ICE was showing up to raid different workplaces throughout downtown LA, in the fashion district, in the flower district of all places. And by the time people got off work, you know, for those who work the 9-to-5 jobs, we'd realized that ICE had descended upon Los Angeles and that they were carrying out Trump's orders to raid and, you know, snatch immigrants. But what we were finding out very quickly is that the immigrants that they were arresting are not these violent immigrants. You know, it's not the propaganda he's talking about. It's some of them are immigrants who have paperwork. Some of them are immigrants who are in the process. And by and large, most of them don't even have criminal records.
Right. I saw some statistic like over 70% actually don't have a criminal record. So it's grandmas and children.
Yeah, and a lot of children. And so the evening of June 6th, there were crowds starting to gather outside the detention center. And by the end of the weekend, the National Guard had been called in. Federal agents were armed with all sorts of weaponry guarding the detention center. And that's when the footage that the national media has captured started, you know, making the rounds. But as somebody who lives blocks away from where all these protests has happened, somebody who's been there every day, I can tell you with full authority that these protests do not become violent until law enforcement decides that they want to remove protesters. And like children, they don't use their words. They just lead with violence, with force. We've seen so many protesters get affected, myself included, by the chemical weapons that federal agents are using.
Wow.
I watched Department of Homeland Security, instead of saying, leave the area or clear the walkway, all they did is had the National Guard push forward with their shields while they used these guns that look like paintball guns that have pepper balls in it. So when they explode on the ground, it's sort of like the equivalent of pepper spray. They're shooting them at the ground, they're shooting them at people. And then they're throwing tear gas canisters, because I picked one up, it said CS gas, tear gas canisters. The first time they did this, it was just to clear a walkway so that cars could enter a detention center.
Wow.
And then later what's happening and is very disappointing is they're calling in our local law enforcement, LAPD, LA Sheriff's Department, to sort of get protesters all the way from an area. And the reason that's so disappointing is that, you know, as a sanctuary city, we thought that our local law enforcement wouldn't be involved.
Right.
But they're sort of going a roundabout way. They're not aiding ICE raids. So in that way, they are abiding by what a sanctuary city is. But they are very much the ones that are running protesters away with force.
Nonviolent protesters.
Nonviolent protesters.
Nonviolent protesters with military-grade weapons.
Yeah, and these are military-grade weapons. And, you know, they're wearing gas masks and they have full gear on. And I saw a woman pushing a stroller with her child.
Yeah, people are dancing and drumming.
People are dancing, drumming. People are armed with cardboard signs, the same signs, you know, the cardboard that you used in elementary school. Those are not a threat to anyone.
Right.
And that's sort of the scene we're seeing. And so when the national media is showing this war zone, I need people to pay close attention because you'll see that the shooting or the throwing or the whatever, for the most part, goes in one direction.
Right.
So if there's anything, you know, to protect and serve or to be a sanctuary city, I think that's why there's even more protesters now because people are calling to question, are we really a sanctuary city then?
Right. Because you can look at what's happening and there's several layers of law enforcement like you mentioned, right?
Yeah.
So we have the federal government sending in the National Guard, the Trump administration sending in the National Guard, and then ultimately the Marines as well.
Yeah.
Thousands of troops total. And then we have, you know, the LA County Sheriff, and then we have the LAPD, and even some places you have the California Highway Patrol, you know, chips.
We saw them as well too.
Yeah, and you have all of these layers of law enforcement responding to nonviolent protesters. And in the city of LA alone, they estimate that it's cost over $20 million the past 2 weeks to mostly going to police and their overtime pay to respond to this. And we're a quote-unquote sanctuary city, and this is how we're responding to people who are standing up for immigrants.
Yeah, and so to go along with that is, you know, there are processes and protocols for when, you know, police can sort of tell people to leave, right? But we're not seeing that. And we're also seeing that media who are trying to cover this are being targeted by police. You know, there are photos and videos that have gone viral. And actually, the first lawsuit was filed yesterday by the LA Press Club against the LAPD and their use of force. And they're, you know, people are going to say, oh, it's a money grab. It's a money grab. I read the lawsuit, and what they want is what's called injunctive and declaratory relief. What they're saying is they want the LAPD to not use force like this and to say out loud, like, this was wrong, this was illegal. And so that's something to look out for because, you know, the media tends to be the first to be targeted. And then now protesters, I'm sure, who are injured, I saw so many injuries, are probably going to start also, you know, going after the LAPD as well.
Lots of people were injured, including press, you know, and media folks from Australia, the woman who was shot in the leg clearly on camera.
She's in that lawsuit,
and others. So it's, you know, that these are the cost of the response to this protest. So it's really interesting.
The LAPD moving in on horseback, firing rubber bullets at protesters, moving them on through the heart of LA. You just shut the fuck up. You okay?
And I think when we say, like, oh, you know, it's just, you know, you should leave if they tell you to leave, or you should, you should stay away if you think it gets too violent. And I think it's important to realize that, you know, people need to protest. People need to get out there, and that people have rights. And so the reason why it's important to look at what's happening in LA right now is because what's happening in LA is already perhaps, or is about to, or can happen in any other city in the nation. You know, Trump chose Los Angeles to be the first quote unquote battleground. But he's already declared that he's going to go after other cities that had the No Kings protest.
Right.
He said he's going to go after other Democratic cities with the same force.
Which, by the way, over 2,000 cities, right? I think 2,100 protests, No Kings protests happened.
Yeah. And so is he using people like pawns just to assert his power? Yes. And that's why people are rising up, and that's why people should really know their rights. Immigrants should know their rights. Protesters should know their rights. And you just really need to arm yourself with that knowledge before you go out there.
Mm-hmm. And another person enforcing their rights, interestingly, is the California governor, Gavin Newsom. And the Attorney General of California filed a lawsuit against the administration because they're arguing that they overstepped their rights. The federal government overstepped their rights by sending National Guards here without the approval of the California governor. And this is the first time something like this has happened in about 60 years.
Yeah, and let's talk about that for a second. I don't think everyone is kind of clear about what this sort of drama is between the California governor and the president. The National Guard is usually under the control of the state governor.
Right.
So if the National Guard needs to call in, it's the governor who does that. Very rarely, though he can, and maybe eventually a she can the president overrule a governor and send in the National Guard? But that's exactly what Trump did here. And when he did it, he cited a particular phrase. It was in case of rebellion or the threat of rebellion against the government. So he actually called in the National Guard because what he saw, people protesting for the rights of their immigrant neighbors, he saw that as a threat to the government. And that should tell you everything about the mindset of the president. And so in doing that, that's sort of the big thing, is that he didn't just send them in because he could. He sent them in for that particular reason. And I don't know if people know this, like the president has in the past overruled a governor to send in the National Guard. But the last time that was done, it was to protect protesters. It was to protect Black children who were being integrated into schools that were desegregating. It was to protect Black protesters from the police.
So it's usually on the side.
But what we now see is that he sort of contorted that precedent, and now it's to, quote unquote, go after, essentially, protesters.
And that's the dynamics of this administration, and they're using words like insurrection to describe what's happening here in Los Angeles. And the White House and DHS actually just put out a video that's, I don't know.
It's propaganda.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm trying to think of another word beyond propaganda. But the video itself incites fear, but also creates this illusion that there's the military versus the people. There are people putting up middle fingers and different things, and the military has to come in and respond to this insurrection. And you're seeing them use this strong language, insurrection, so that they can invoke other exceptions to rules where they want to suspend habeas corpus. Where they want to suspend habeas corpus and do other things, and they're trying to declare that there's an insurrection happening within the country. Yeah,
and speaking of habeas corpus, I think that's part of the discussion when it comes to immigration and ICE that people are missing. Is people are quick to be like, well, legal immigrant versus illegal immigrant. But that's actually, that's a discussion to be had another time. And the reason I say another time is that the issue people have with ICE and the way they're carrying out these immigration raids is that they are completely ignoring habeas corpus, which is due process. And due process is something that's guaranteed by the Constitution. And I think it's important to note that it's not just guaranteed to citizens. Right? Scholars have gone over the Constitution over and over and over again. And where they want to use the word citizen, they use the word citizen. And where they want to say the people in the United States, they say the people in the United States. The wording of the Constitution is so specific and intentional. And so when it comes to due process and habeas corpus, which is the right of due process, is that if you get arrested by the government, you should be put in front of a judge. You should have a trial. There has to be someone that you plead your case to before you're deported, before you're charged and arrested. And it's important to note that in the Constitution of the United States, the right to due process, habeas corpus, is granted to anybody in the United States, regardless of citizenship. And so when we talk about these ICE raids, one of the major issues are people being deported without any due process. And that's what people are standing up for.
That's why. I mean, that's literally what people are protesting, these violations of the Constitution. And then the response to the protests agitates people more.
Another violation.
Yeah, like the organization SEIU, which is the one of the largest unions here in Southern California, representing over 100,000 workers, has declared this the summer of resistance with other organizations, I think in response to their president being arrested and the different things that's happened to their members at protests. And I was actually at a protest with them yesterday doing the Know Your Rights training. And you see the fire that's actually increasing because of the response to this.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting to know all the different ways that, law enforcement or the federal government is trying to suppress people speaking out. They're using local law enforcement to put down protests. They're letting local law enforcement arrest en masse to try to scare people. They're going after labor unions like the SEIU. And what we saw recently is that organizations that are perhaps leading protests, that are helping immigrants, that are providing mutual aid to people who are at protests or to other immigrant organizations, the federal government, federal officials have threatened to investigate them, and for the most part, a lot of these are local community organizations that most cities have.
Right.
They're just advocate programs, they're community groups, they're places of gathering. And so this attempt to scare people, it's easy to get down, to feel afraid. But I think, maybe it's also, if you flip that, it's to know that like there must be an impact being made if they feel that these groups are a threat.
Exactly. And the way they're going about doing it, like the language the federal government used when threatening these nonprofits is saying they're supporting immigrants. That's not illegal. That's not illegal.
Yeah.
We have the right to free speech in this country, and we can stand up for communities. So it's really a shame that just fundamental freedoms are being trampled on just because they disagree. And there was a big swelling of this happening on No King's Day, in the past Saturday, where some say up to 5 million people nationwide participated in protests in over 2,000 cities.
It's a lot of people. And, it was interesting because I've seen I've seen groups come out en masse for protests. But this is the first time in a very long time where I looked around and it really felt representative of LA. You saw people of different cultures, people of different backgrounds, people, immigrants risked it to go out. Families of immigrants risked it to go out. People stepped out of their comfort zone, to be there because it felt important, because it felt like they needed to support their neighbors. And I think, you asked me earlier if LA is on fire. I think maybe more fired up. People are rallying. People are getting radicalized. People are speaking up. And, they're trying to scare folks, but I don't think it's working. And it's kind of cool to see.
Yeah. No, it's actually agitating folks more. It's really interesting, And I had never really seen a protest that large, that gathering in LA, even compared to 2020, this past Saturday. And there were several throughout LA County, whether it's in Pasadena and Torrance. And they're estimating that hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets in LA. And I honestly think had they not done the ICE raids, had they not sent in the Marines, it would have been less people.
Yeah. And, it's interesting. Like I said, I've been there every day. And sometimes, as protests wind down, you see that it becomes sort of a silent, actually, standoff between protesters and police. And usually the only reason protesters can't leave is because police have sort of trapped them into a certain area. And I heard, because the police radio was really loud, an officer go, "I think they're here because we're here. Should we try to leave?" And then another cop say, "No," and it happened on my block. That standoff lasted for maybe another hour until they finally let people go, and then protesters left, and then police left. And so it's just interesting to see because, by and large, protesters know what they're there for.
Right.
And, people talk about looting and the destruction of neighborhoods. I live in Little Tokyo in Los Angeles, which is the closest neighborhood to everything happening. And we've seen multiple times that protesters get pushed away from the federal buildings into my neighborhood. And despite all that, nothing crazy happened in my neighborhood. A little graffiti that was easy to clean, but no looting. The mom and pop shops were not affected. No windows smashed, no looting, no nothing.
No insurrection?
No insurrection. But what's a shame is that, they implemented a curfew in the downtown LA area. And that's actually affecting all the small businesses more than anything.
I remember I had to cancel Roomba class.
Yeah, they're canceling joy.
Yeah, essentially.
And so I think it's interesting because they say we're doing this to keep you safe, which sounds very police-like to me. But at the end, it's really just disrupting.
Right.
The disruptions to my life, to my neighborhood, are not because of protesters. Mm-hmm. In fact, it's beautiful when all the protesters are walking around my neighborhood with their signs.
Yeah.
It's the reaction to the protesting.
Right.
It's the fear mongering. It's the curfews. It's the all that. And so I think people should look very closely at what's actually happening.
And our sanctuary city is still under curfew. Unfortunately, over a week, it's still under curfew. Citizens are not allowed in the downtown area specifically to venture out past 10 p.m.
Yeah, and, it's sad because they're like, well, you live here, it's fine. I'm like, well, I live in a neighborhood that's usually vibrant, but it's now shut down by 7 p.m., So I do say that people should just take the national media with a grain of salt. Mm-hmm. But also, I think we saw national media see for the first time what's happening.
So what are some essential rights to be aware of in this moment? And just a reminder to our viewers and listeners, we have our Know Your Rights Camp app that can help you and provide you with knowledge on your rights nationwide.
Yeah, I think it's important knowing your basic rights, but also just being aware that there might be anything local to you. Mm-hmm. So that's why I would definitely check out the app. But know your rights as a protester, right? Know that you have the right to free speech. Know that you have the right to assemble. And then,
but also know your limitations.
But also know your limitations and understand that there's your rights and there's your reality. And so understand that if this is the way police are acting, to be very aware of your rights when you're interacting with police. Mm-hmm. If you get into a situation, your number one question is, am I free to leave? And if the answer is yes, just go. Mm-hmm. Don't question it, just go. And if they say no, ask why. And then start preparing yourself for what's next, Mm-hmm. Say no, the minute they say no, you can't leave and that you're being detained and possibly arrested, that's when you start invoking your right to remain silent.
Right.
That's when you tell them that I don't consent to a search that they'll probably do anyway, but you're going to say all these things to invoke your rights so people can sort of litigate that later. Mm-hmm. And then for immigrants or for immigrants in your life, your neighbors, your family, your friends, let them know that they should look for a red card. For those that don't know what red cards are, they're available online and in most communities. The red card on one side says your rights. The red card on the other side says in English that you're invoking your rights if you don't speak English well. But those rights basically are that you want to talk to an attorney, that you're not that you don't want to speak to them, that you're not going to sign anything, and then that you're not going to disclose your immigration status, that you need to see a warrant, these things. Mm-hmm. Immigration rights are tricky. You don't want to ask someone their status out loud in case the cops hear it. Right. And most importantly, don't sign anything because it's so sad. But what we're seeing is that a lot of immigrants who can't speak or read English are given pieces of paper by ICE agents that are in English. Yeah. They sign it without knowing what they're saying, and what they've just signed is an agreement to self-deport.
Right. Yeah, I know. ICE employs lots of tactics that intimidate, manipulate. Mm-hmm. Yesterday at the Know Your Rights training at the protest, I had a young boy who, at his father's request, asked me to train him and show him how to respond if ICE knocks on his door and his grandma's being undocumented. Yeah. And we did a role play thing where I knocked on the door and his first thing was to let me in and open the door. I said, no, don't open the door. Ask who it is and ask for a warrant, ask this and that. But then yesterday afterwards, I was thinking wow, I was just showing an 11-year-old how to stop them from kidnapping his grandma, essentially. Yeah. And that's the reality of what we're showing and what people have to deal with.
The youth are very much involved in what's happening right now because the youth are often the targets because they're an easy target because they didn't know. if they're undocumented or not, or the youth are documented and now they're trying to protect their parents, their aunts, uncles, their grandparents. And then what we've seen youth at the grocery store doing the family shopping because their parents can't come out.
Right.
We've seen the youth at the protests because they're like, well, my parents can't, so I'm here. I got arrested at a protest last week, and we had a minor in there with us, with her mom.
Wow.
Yeah, and so, the youth play a major role in this, and so just don't discount them. But unfortunately, they're growing up fast, and that's another side effect of everything that's going on. On the helicopter, LAPD helicopter, they said they were using facial recognition technology. Whatever, the guy in the helicopter was an asshole.
I saw some of the videos. Just like
I don't even know if he knew the thing was on. Because he was like, you in the green hat, we're going to get you one day.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's like you in the purple. And we were like, does he know we can hear him? Like, yeah.
What are you doing? What are you doing? High five. Hey, that black SUV, I got the plate. I'm coming to your house at 5 in the morning. Okay? Yep, you. Throw something else, I dare you. Throw something else, I dare you. Do it again. Do it again. Let's go. You ain't getting away from me. I got you locked.
They're literally praying in our face. They are literally inciting this violence.
Do it again.
You were out there in 2020 with all the uprisings in the name of George Floyd and every other unfortunate black man and woman that was killed by police. But we were out there and police were 100% violent. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that.
Right.
But this is the most violent I've seen local law enforcement since then, because I heard it on the police radio. They were given the blanket okay to use their less lethal weapons. Usually, if there's, a police line of, let's say, 100 cops, you see one less lethal weapon, which is rubber bullets, foam bullets, pepper balls. You see one for every 15, 20 cops. This, I saw one for every 5 to 7 cops.
Yeah.
And they're shooting them with without having to get any okay.
Happy. You saw
they're trigger
lines
happy
of them just unloading and reloading.
I've been documenting people's injuries. Some of their rounds are supposed to be shot at the ground and then ricochet back up. I caught one to the ankle. But others are supposed to be shot like center mass from a distance. We saw people getting shot close up.
Yeah.
It's breaking skin. People are getting surgery because their arm is too broken to be set with a cast. A woman got shot on the cheek.
Yeah.
They're aiming high, and they're aiming from even 100 feet away. What threat is that person to you from 100 feet away when you're armed with a weapon and that person is not armed at all?
Right.
And protesters, when we say they're fighting back, they're not physically charging the police. They're using their words, which I know are scary, but not scary like that.
Yeah.
I'm sure the power is, the empowerment is scary, but police are just being told to do whatever is necessary. They're shooting flashbangs in the air.
I mean, come on.
I've had flashbangs. My ears were ringing because they were shooting flashbangs or stinger grenades in the air above us. Because instead of saying leave, they shoot in your direction.
Right. Military grade weapons.
These
and
are
some
military
of them
grade
are
weapons,
actually banned from the military and used in war. And even when the rubber bullets ricochet off the ground, the force is still hardcore. Like, can you actually show people
it's hard
like
to see right now, but this is like the result of a ricochet of like a bullet, and it's still kind of gross.
A rubber bullet, right?
But I've seen people, like one person had his pinky finger broken because the LA directive is supposed to be, shoot at the center, legs if necessary, and shoot from at least 5 feet away. We see them shooting from much closer.
Close
but
range.
If you can shoot from 5 feet away, but
close
the
range.
range for your weapon is actually 110 feet, think about that. If you can shoot someone from 110 feet away, but you catch them at 5 to 10 feet away, the impact is severe. It's breaking skin. There are bruises.
Right. Again, responding to non-violent protesters.
Yeah, they're just trying
to looters. We're not responding to another military
and
invading.
actually, there's a lot of videos online. If you look for from the No King's Day protest, I was actually in front of the federal building in downtown LA. People were dancing.
Right.
There was somebody chanting, and he used an auto-tune device, so it was kind of fun. People were chanting and responding. People were flying flags. People were line dancing. And then police, you could only hear it if you were right in front of them, said, hey, this is unlawful assembly, and then just started shooting off their weapons.
Wow.
And then we have police on horseback that are wielding these huge batons and are beating people, including seniors, as they're walking away.
Yeah.
You
That was
know?
scary. I saw one of the videos you posted.
Yeah.
With you directly there in this horse with armor and like the
Yeah.
sun.
Yeah.
glares
So
on.
it was an LAPD cop on a horse, and it was just a mess because they told everyone to go south to leave. So I went south to leave. And then another set of cops said, actually go that way.
Wow.
But by the time we doubled back to go the other way, following directions, there were, horses on cops. I mean, cops on horses. Well, that would be interesting. There were cops on horses, and to be honest, I don't know anything about horses. But it didn't seem like either the horse didn't want to be there, probably not, or police didn't really feel very in control of the horses that they were on. And I think it's a choice to bring out horses when you know that your other police brethren are using less lethal weapons that have loud popping noises.
Yeah.
I don't think, no matter how well you train a horse, I don't think that that's a noise that they feel comfortable being around. There's flashbangs, there's, these popping noises from the weapons. And so, yeah, I was trying to get away, but I can't run. You don't want to run so fast that you trample the person in front of you.
Right.
So as I'm running away, there's this cop on a horse, and he manages, I managed to fall down, but luckily other protesters and even some media broke what they were doing to help me back up.
Right.
But there's a lot of people, and the police who are on horseback, and these are huge horses.
Right.
So the police are elevated at least, 10 feet above you, have these huge sticks larger than the normal police baton. And you see them actively raising it above their heads to hit people. And again, I don't know what the point of that is. And, people talk all the time about the Marines and the National Guard and all of that. But, what we're seeing now, which is, what we saw in 2020, is local law enforcement are taking up the helm, and
Right.
they're doing it without abandon. So
Yeah, I mean, and with support from our local officials, and shout out to City Controller Kenneth Mejia, who showed and documented actually that the law enforcement, LAPD, has cost $17 million in the past, 10 or so days.
Yeah.
Multi-million dollars each day. The protests have cost the city,
Yeah.
mostly going to LAPD.
and it's to suppress, people's voices. That's
Voices
really all it is.
in a sanctuary city, right?
Yeah.
Voices for the people that the city said they are supporting and allied with.
Yeah.
And then nationally, it's even more. They're estimating with the thousands of National Guardsmen, the 700 Marines, that it's going to cost $134 million just in the city of LA to respond to a protest.
And yet we have one of the worst education systems
I mean,
in
yeah.
the world. We don't have universal health care.
Right.
Homelessness is an issue, but sure, let's send in everybody. And people
Right.
say oh, you can't make the argument. It's not equal. Maybe it's not equal in the way you think it is, but at the end of the day, regardless of where you think the money should be spent, it shouldn't be spent this way.
Right. And it's interesting to see them using the horses and abusing that because the city also cut funding for humane shelters and other animals and different things. So
Yeah, and we're focusing on LA because that's sort of the epicenter of this fight right now. But like we said earlier, Trump, in response to the huge No King's Day protests that were going on, declared that he would do whatever is happening in LA is going to happen in all these other cities.
right.
And so we encourage folks to sort of pay attention for when it comes to your city.
Yeah, if it's not already there.
Start figuring out a rapid response network for your neighborhood. Start figuring out community patrols to keep neighbors safe. Start printing out these red cards and giving them to neighbors, give them to businesses. We've seen in LA that, I showed up at a restaurant and the restaurant handed out these red cards just in case people needed them. And so I would say now's the time to prepare yourself. And like we said before, learn your rights, know your rights, download that app and look it up, look up your state, see what's going on. And just prepare yourself, because right now, you know, the phrase "we keep us safe" has never been more true than before.
Right.
Yeah.
We know things always pop off in the summertime.
Yeah.
The summer is just getting started.
Yeah.
The summer resistance continues.
Yeah, and so, you know, the summer of resistance, you know, the summer of resistance is going on tour, and it's going on a tour of the nation. And so, you know, whether you like it or not, you're going to end up catching a show nearby. So, you know, be involved, meet the moment. I think that's a phrase that someone used. I think I saw it on social media, but, you know, now's the time to meet the moment. For more information, check us out at knowyourrightscamp.org.